All right, our next organelle that we'll look at is the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the Golgi bodies. It means the exact same thing. But if you'll notice the shape, the structure of this little organelle here looks very, very similar to the ER. And when we list the structure, we say it's layers or stacks of folded membranes, almost identical to what we said the ER was. And you'll see when we get to the function here that their jobs are very similar as well. Remember, the ER's main job was to transport the proteins around within the cell. The Golgi apparatus, its job is to transport those proteins and other materials as well. But the type of transportation it's going to be doing is exporting materials from the cell. So if you think back to social studies class, export means to ship stuff out. So the Golgi apparatus is going to package up materials, again, usually proteins, but it could be other things. Pack those things up and send them out of the cell. If there's a protein that's made in one cell, but that protein needs to be used in another cell, that protein would move through the ER, then into the Golgi apparatus, and then it would pack it up into these little bubble-looking things here, and then those things would move through the cell membrane and out in to the extracellular space, outside of the cell, and then go to wherever they need to go. So again, the Golgi apparatus got a very, very similar structure to the ER, layers or stacks of folded membranes. Very similar job. The function of the Golgi apparatus is going to be to export materials, to ship stuff out of the cell. Our next organelle is the lysosome. And so this again is a cross section of the lysosome. It's been sliced in half so we can see the inside of it. I've had some students say that it kind of looks like a pizza or something, but in reality it's going to be more like a sphere or a ball. It's going to be fairly small and round. But one important part about the structure of this lysosome is going to be, if you'll notice here on the picture, we've got two membranes and two little black lines going around the outside of it. So it's got a double membrane going around the outside of it. So again, structure and function are related to each other. So again, there's a reason for that double membrane. We'll get to that reason in just a second. Now the job of the lysosome, it's kind of the cleanup crew of the cell. It's going to break down any other organelles that have kind of stopped working or become injured or damaged. The lysosome has these enzymes inside of it, that this stuff on the inside of these lysosomes is really nasty stuff. And so if there's, again, an organelle that's kind of stopped working, the lysosome will kind of go over to it and link up with it, and these enzymes inside the lysosome will break down the parts of that organelle that's not working anymore, and those parts will then get recycled by the cell. It'll also do the same thing with large food particles. So if the cell has taken in a food particle that's too big for it to really use, the lysosome will kind of link up with it, break down those large food particles into smaller pieces, and then release them out into the cytoplasm, where they can be picked up and used by maybe the mitochondria or whatever needs those little food particles. So the main job of the lysosome is going to be to break down stuff. And again, it does that through the use of these hydrolytic enzymes. Again, I don't care that you know the name of this stuff, this hydrolytic enzyme, but just know that this is some nasty stuff in here. And we don't want that stuff, that nasty stuff, leaking out. So that double membrane kind of serves as just a one extra protective layer. I used to give the example of, when my my little girl was in diapers, we had this one trash can that we set in the room where we generally change her diapers at, and I tried to make sure that I changed that trash bag quite frequently. But if it had been a few days and it got kind of full, before I went to take that old nasty trash bag and pack it through my house to get it outside, um, if it was really full, I would put a second trash bag on it. I would double bag it just to make sure that while I'm walking through the house, none of this nasty stuff that's in this garbage bag leaks out. Well, it's the same sort of idea here with this lysosome and this double membrane. These enzymes that can break down stuff. We don't want that stuff leaking out and breaking down the good parts of the cell. So we've got this kind of double liner that goes around the outside to keep that nasty stuff in. So structure and function and related to each other. All right, let's look at the vacuole here. And vacuoles look a little bit differently in plant cells and animal cells. So in the picture here, you'll say this is a plant vacuole, but the structure, is going to be kind of generally the same. There's going to be like a bag or a sac within the cell. In plant cells, we're usually going to see one big, large vacuole kind of right in the middle. In animal cells, typically we're going to have several vacuoles that are going to be smaller in size. So again, some slight differences, but they're basically the same. Just mainly just a size difference between the two. The function of the vacuole, again, it's kind of like a bag within the cells. Or what do you use the bag for? You use it to store stuff. So the vacuole is responsible for storing materials. Could be extra water, extra food, anything that the cell has that it needs to store. It's going to keep it in those vacuoles. Right? Now the plant cell, again, with that one big large vacuole, it's going to have another function. It's also going to kind of help to give some support to the shape or the form of the cell in plants. So if plants have extra water, they're going to store it in that vacuole, and that vacuole is going to kind of swell, like if you put water in a water balloon. That water balloon gets bigger and bigger, kind of puffs up. Well, that's what's going to happen with this plant vacuole. When there's plenty of water around, those plant cells are all going to kind of fill their vacuoles up with extra water. It's going to kind of help make them all stand upright. Plants don't have a skeletal system, so a lot of them need that. If you don't water your plants for a few days, and they have to use some of that water that's in those vacuoles, you'll probably notice that they start to droop over. Again, because those vacuoles, the water that's within those vacuoles is getting used up, and so the vacuoles shrink, and it kind of causes each cell to kind of squish in the middle a little bit, and the whole plant kind of droops over. And now, if you catch it in time and water the plants, they don't die immediately because they have that extra storage of water there. But if you find it in time and give them a little extra water, they'll perk back up again because, again, those vacuoles will get filled back up with some of that extra water. Right, so there's the vacuole, again, this storage tank within the cell. All right, we got just a couple more left, starting with the chloroplast here. And the chloroplast, again, our picture has given us kind of a cross section where we can kind of see down into the middle. A real chloroplast would go all the way around. We would be able to see those things on the inside there. But the structure of the chloroplast, again, on the outside we have this double membrane. So you can see one here in green, the other one in brown. So we got kind of this double membrane on the outside. And then within that double membrane on the inside here, we see we have these stacks of what we call photosynthetic membranes. Photosynthetic. So that should remind you of a word that you're pretty familiar with by now. So the chloroplast is going to be the place where photosynthesis happens. And so we're not going to see this in animal cells. We're only going to see this in plant cells. But these photosynthetic membranes here, these ones that are green with the yellow on the inside of them, and again, that's an artist rendering of them, but in any case, those are very, very super important. So that's the reason for the double membrane in this one. We want to give a little extra protection to those things inside, make sure they don't get hurt. But this is where photosynthesis happens. This is where the light energy from the sun gets converted into the chemical energy, the food that the plant can use, and then later on those consumers can use as well. Yeah, so there's the chloroplast. Right, got the mitochondria up next, and with the mitochondria, again, we're seeing a cross section has been cut in half so we can see the inside of it. But the structure, if you can see kind of the whole thing, is going to look like a kidney bean. Again, kidney beans, if you're not familiar with what those look like, they usually kind of bulge outwards on one side and then kind of dip in on the other. So that's kind of the kidney bean shape there that we're talking about. With the mitochondria, we've got this outer membrane going around the outside. Again, giving a little extra protection to this inner membrane that's all folded up on the inside. Again, there's some important stuff going on in here, so that's the reason for this second smooth outer membrane going around the outside. And then on that folded inner membrane, that's where the action takes place. And the action for the mitochondrion that's where cellular respiration takes place. Now, cellular respiration is not cell breathing, so that word respiration doesn't mean breathing. It means this is the place where the energy gets utilized. All right? So we take in food. If it's a plant, it makes its own food in the chloroplast. If it's a consumer like us, we eat our food. And then once that food gets kind of broken down, digesting, and sent to the little individual cells, it's going to be sent to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is going to take that food and it's going to break it apart and release the energy that's being stored up in those chemical bonds, so that the different little cell parts have the energy that they need to do the things that they need to do. Now, with the mitochondria, again, we mentioned earlier in the lesson that they kind of reproduce on their own. So certain cells are going to have lots of mitochondria. Muscle cells, for example, where you need a lot of energy, they're going to have a lot of mitochondria. Other cells are going to have a few. But those mitochondria produce they take the food, that food particles, mainly sugar molecules, glucose molecules, and break those little molecules apart, release the energy that's being stored up in those little chemical bonds that are holding those glucose molecules together. And it gives the cell the energy that it needs to do all the other stuff that we've been talking about. All right, so we got, I think, just maybe two more here. So the next one is the cell wall. And again, the structure of the cell wall, and if you think of structure and function being related to each other, the cell wall is going to be thick and rigid, so kind of like a wall. Whereas we said the cell membrane is going to be thin and flexible. The cell wall is going to be very thick, very rigid. So here in this picture, the green part that you see here, but also the pink part as well, that whole thing is going to be the cell wall. And then just underneath it, you would see the thin little cell membrane. They didn't do a very good job of showing that in this picture, but there's still going to be a cell membrane just inside that cell wall. But you've got the big thick cell wall that's going to be on the outer covering. It's made of this stuff called cellulose, at least in plant cells, which is actually a non-living material. So the cellulose part, the wall part, is actually not a living part of the cell. And it has lots of openings in it called pits that allow materials to move through one cell through the cell wall complex to another. And the main function for the cell wall is going to be to protect the cell. Again, we're going to see this pretty much only in plant cells and in fungal cells. And it's also going to give some support as well, that big, thick, rigid wall. No cell wall in animal cells, though. All right, then the last one that we'll talk about, and I just want to mention this one kind of briefly. It's a little more in depth than what we need to go to, but within the cell, there is this system called the cytoskeleton, which is going to be a network of, you know, little tubes and filaments that are going to help give the cell some shape and structure. Um, so it's going to run pretty much all the way through the cell. They're going to be kind of small. This one here, this blue thing here, this would be a microtubule. So you see it's kind of hollow on the inside. These little thin lines, the one through here, those are going to be the microfilaments. And again, just trying to help give some shape and some structure, some scaffolding to the cell. So the microtubules are going to be hollow tubes of proteins. Again, these blue things here in the picture, those are going to be your microtubules. And they're going to serve kind of as tracks that the different organelles can kind of move along with those microtubules. And then you're going to have the microfilaments that give this kind of tough, flexible framework to the cell to kind of support what's going on there within the cell. And then those microfilaments are going to function some in cellular movement. So like in muscle cells, again, we see these microfilaments. They can contract and stretch, and that contracting and stretching is going to help the cell to do whatever movement that it needs to do. One last point, those microfilaments are very, very thin, very, very small. They're going to be much, much smaller than microtubules, but the microtubules and the microfilaments are themselves usually much, much smaller than the other organelles as well. Very hard to see these under a microscope, whereas most of the other parts we can see. All right. So that pretty much wraps up our discussion on cell structure and function. If you have any questions, make sure you bring those to class with you. We will do some activities. We'll do some exercises, some practice to help you remember what these different parts of the cell do and what they look like. Again, I hope you got your notes complete, and I thank you guys for watching the videos.